Good to see everybody. All right, we're a minute past the hour. I'll start the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Robert Thomas Kearns. I'm the Restoration Partnerships Coordinator at the Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration. And welcome to the Dam Busters webinar series, a collaboration between the Massachusetts Rivers Alliance, the Charles River Watershed Association, and the Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration. This webinar series offers basic information about dam removal. It's not intended to advocate for the removal of any particular dam or dams. For the webinar series and topics and exact schedule, please visit the Mass Rivers Alliance website at www.massriversalliance.org. And we recommend you check the site frequently, see the latest information, and we were going to be having a conference this fall and other things. So a lot of exciting things happening. So stay tuned. Also, please mark your calendar for our next Dam Busters webinar on May 6th, which is about creative communications for dam removal. And it is a reviewing of a short documentary film called Reconnecting Rivers with the Charles River Watershed Association. Also, we have an exciting webinar on Earth Day to announce. On Wednesday, April 22nd, Mass Rivers is hosting a webinar from noon to 1 p.m. with science and environmental journalist James Deenan on a presentation called Toxic Relationships, Investigating Aging Dam Infrastructure Near Contaminated Waste Sites Across the United States. And we will be sharing that link in the chat, so please join us for that interesting webinar. And then today's webinar is about dam removal effects on freshwater mussels and fishes. A few housekeeping items. One, this session is scheduled to end at 1 p.m. Please put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, which we are tracking, or hold them to the last half hour's question and answer session. Also, as people have been doing, please put your name and affiliation in the chat, and note that these webinars are being recorded. And the recording and any other materials will be made available on the Mass Rivers Alliance website. Additionally, thank you to those who are completing the post-session surveys. We have a fun new incentive Mass Rivers has for you. If you fill out the survey, you get your we have a new incentive to offer your very own Hydro Flask water bottle with a Mass Rivers logo on it. Fill the survey, include your name and address at the bottom. You will have a chance to win the Hydro Flask water bottle. We'll send out the survey link after today's webinar. Very exciting. Thanks, Mass Rivers, for that incentive. So remember to fill out your survey. And now I am delighted to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Allison Roy, who's going to be talking about dam removal effects on freshwater fishes and mussels. And her bio is Dr. Allison Roy is the unit leader with the U.S. Geological Survey's Massachusetts Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit, an adjunct research professor at the Department of Environmental Conservation at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Dr. Roy works closely with state and federal agencies to co-produce research that characterizes anthropogenic impacts on aquatic ecosystems and assesses responses to conservation and restoration. Her field-based research typically employs large spatial gradients to identify stressor responses and species habitat relationships within lakes and streams. Her graduate students and postdocs have worked on numerous projects in New England that have informed winter lake drawdown guidance, dam removal, prioritization, water conservation, freshwater mussel restoration, and river herring management, among other topics. So with that, I'll pass it over to Dr. Roy. Very excited to hear this presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Robert. Let's share my screen. Does that look okay?
Yes, looks great.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining, and thank you to the folks who organized for giving me the opportunity to come present twice in a few months. So I spoke in January about the effects on water quality and macroinvertebrates, and today I'm going to focus on a little bit of the larger, shinier objects with freshwater mussels and fishes. So I'm excited to share with you some of the work that we've been doing throughout the last decade on this topic. Let's see if we can start. So there we go. So we're in a global biodiversity crisis, really, we are. And interestingly, freshwater ecosystems have been hit worse than marine ecosystems and worse than terrestrial ecosystems. And even though a lot of the biota, the charismatic fauna that are in oceans and terrestrial environments get a lot more attention, freshwater is really encompassing a large amount of the decline in biodiversity and is a large amount of diversity overall. Why? Well, of course, there are a variety of reasons, but many of our threatened and endangered species are that way because of a variety of threats, including dams and fragmentation and habitat fragmentation. So that brings us to where we are, and what we're talking about today is how to mitigate those effects of dams. It's none other than putting equipment into the stream or river and just taking them out. Obviously, this group all knows very well that river restoration is becoming more and more popular. And, you know, looking to improve habitat for wildlife, for fishes, is one of the many benefits of dam removal. And so we're really interested in kind of exploring that more and trying to quantify those benefits so that we knew a little bit more about what to expect following dam removal. So largely the questions that we've been tackling over the last decade or so are, what are the stream responses to dam removal? And from a conceptual standpoint, we kind of think about dam removal and the effects in three different sections of a stream. So we think about this upstream section from a reservoir, which normally you wouldn't think that, oh, why would that be impacted by the dam? But just removing that barrier, of course, allows for organisms that migrate to go up, so fish recolonization upstream, and those bring nutrient subsidies and other changes to the ecosystem upstream. More commonly, we think about the effects of the impoundment itself. So you take a lake, a lentic environment, and change it to a lotic environment, and that's going to change the whole ecosystem structure in fundamental ways. And then we also think about the downstream impact. So just because we're removing a dam and changing just that one section from lentic to lotic habitat doesn't mean that there aren't potential changes downstream, and in both positive and negative ways, right? So we can think about, looking at these pictures, the mass amount of sediment that can move through. That is challenge for organisms and other things that can't move and avoid it, but also it's a great opportunity to bring back the diverse bed textures and sediments that are important for our ecosystems and get all of the processes back. So yeah, so we have this conceptualization and we have a lot of studies of dam removal, but most of the studies have been done in large dams, those that are tall, those that get a lot of press, those that are in big river systems. And when we started this research, really there was limited work in smaller dams, and we recognized the need to just learn a little bit more about what's going on in these smaller dams, and with smaller dam removals, what sort of responses do we expect to see? And so that's what we set out to tackle. And so for today's talk, I'm going to talk about actually a variety of projects throughout, but I'm going to organize them in a couple of big chunks. First, I'm going to talk about fish responses to dam removal. Then I'll talk about the freshwater mussel responses to dam removal. And then I'm going to try to take a step back to a bigger whole ecosystem and bigger landscape perspective and what these results mean for that. So most people know that when you take out a dam, it allows these migratory fishes to return. And as I already mentioned, like, there are great stories of this, right? The Klamath dam removal and the recovery of salmon. It was a fantastic story in the Northeast. We've got the Penobscot River dam removal that allowed for recolonization of anadromous fishes upstream. But again, the question was, well, what's happening in these smaller systems? Some of these, we have been removing the dams specifically for anadromous fishes. So we took on sampling and looking at responses to these smaller dam removals at a couple of sites in Massachusetts. So the West Britannia Dam was removed in 2018 on the Mill River, and that allowed for access up to Sebacia, Lake Sebacia and Winnacunnet for anadromous river herring. And so our group was not trying to look, so this is a collaboration with the Division of Marine Fisheries and the Nature Conservancy, and the Division of Marine Fisheries was looking at the movement of several fishes by getting the adults. We were looking at what was the response by surveying the juveniles. So we've been surveying juvenile river herring in lakes and ponds on the eastern shore of Massachusetts for many years, and we wanted to compare these systems that had a dam removal and allowed new access to the other systems that we'd been studying for years. This is work in collaboration with Adrian Jordan at UMass and our PhD student, Matt Devine, was really trying to answer this question about what is the magnitude and timing of the recovery, and how do these changes in having adult river herring and their offspring, the juveniles, back into the lakes and ponds, how does that change the ecosystems? I'm going to focus mostly on just, did we see river herring return? So this is how we sample for juvenile river herring. We go out at night with this giant seine that we deploy from a boat and make a big circle. We purse it at the bottom. It's called a purse seine. And then we count all of the fish that are in the net. And then we take a subset of them and bring them back to the lab, and where we can age them to the number of days old they are and figure out their growth rates. And so the great news was, a year after these dam removals, the fish came back. And these were the numbers of fish that we got in a given haul. So, I mean, this is a big area that we're serving. And, we're not talking about a ton of fish here, but we found them, and we found them immediately following dam removal. We saw them in 2018, 19, and 20, a little limited sampling in 2020, which is why those numbers look a little bit lower. But the big results was, yes, they come back, and they come back fast. Now, how many come back is where the story gets a little bit more interesting. So if I put these numbers in terms of a density, so a numbers per volume of water, our dam removal sites are all over on the right there. You can see that the numbers are not the same as the numbers as in these other systems throughout the East Coast that still have these anadromous runs in them. And when I forgot to mention, so Horn Pond had improvements to the fish ladder to allow access. So it's not a dam removal site, but we kind of included it as a restored site. But you can see that the densities are really low. We do have one pond that we study that has these low densities, but certainly these small ponds don't have large densities after 3 years. At this point, that's what we have for the data. We haven't gone back, I think we might think about going back 10 years later and to see if they've gone any higher and they're more comparable to those other sites. But what I do want to show you is what that means in terms of the river herring growing. So as I said, we bring them back to the lab and we measure them. And it's fascinating how variable the sizes can be. In these restored systems, the ones with the red stars, there are much, much faster growth rates than most of the other systems we have. And this is really due to the density dependent effect. So the more fish you have, the lower growth rates those fish have. So these fish are coming in, recolonizing right away, and then they've got lots of food. And so they are immediately growing such that we predict, larger fish at the end of the day, at the end of the season when they're migrating out in these restored sites compared to the other sites. So this bodes potentially well for survival and coming back. So they start to reach maturity and come back to breed in about 3 to 4 years after they're born. And so that's where the really exciting time frame starts to come in and see what the potential is for overall recovery when these fishes, the offspring of the original colonizers, are coming back. And we're excited to see that more. So that's the river herring story. Anadromous fishes are really, I mean, when we talk about fishes and dam removal, people are usually thinking about those anadromous fishes coming back, but not thinking so much about how this is affecting freshwater fishes that are, inhabiting our streams and rivers. We were really interested in looking at this and using data from Mass Wildlife that they collect and have collected for decades, capitalizing on those data to see if we can see any changes in other fish species with dam removals. So we pulled from the whole database. The points here are places that at that point, there were 70 dam removals in Massachusetts. And so we looked at all 70 of those sites and tried to see if we had sampling either upstream or downstream before and after the dam removal. The years before or after varied in these systems, and the locations of where the fish sampling happened relative to the dam was also variable. So we looked within a 3 kilometer kind of space upstream or downstream. We also worked with Mass Wildlife to supplement these data at sites that had some before sampling but might not have had after sampling so that we could get more of a picture. And overall, we had 38 dam removal sites that had fish samples on them, either upstream or downstream before and after dam removal, on 29 streams and rivers. And we had a lot of sampling events to work with. I'm pointing out here the sites in blue that are designated as cold water fisheries resources. So one of the groups that people talk about is cold water fishes and concerns about cold water fishes. And certainly dam removal has the potential to affect cold water fishes. As a reminder from my last talk, we do see that the dams themselves are increasing temperatures have higher temperatures downstream compared to upstream. So those impoundments are warming the temperatures, and that is translating to warmer temperatures downstream of dams. And to the point that the changes that we're seeing in the summer temperatures are such that it can change the stream thermal class. And so these arrows, it's looking at the data a slightly different way. So a long arrow shows a big change, and the bottom of the arrow is the upstream temperature, and the top of the arrow is the end of the arrow is the downstream temperature. And so you can see at all the sites on the left, they're changing quite a bit between upstream and downstream. And they're shifting from cold water or cool water, cold water to cool water, or cool water to warm water streams. These are categorizations based on this summer mean July temperature and work from Connecticut Deep that had classified our streams as warm water, cool water, and cold water based on those temperatures. And interestingly, the warm water streams, we didn't see a whole lot of change in temperature from upstream to downstream, but in these cold water and cool water streams, we did. And so one would expect, since these classes are based on tolerance of fishes, that we would see changes in fishes associated with this. So first, let me tell you what the changes of temperature were. I'm just going to give one example of a cold water stream in near Northampton, Massachusetts. So Upper Roberts Meadow Brook that was removed in 2018. These are the temperatures, again, comparing upstream to downstream. And so above the line is warmer downstream than upstream. And you can, across the x-axis are the months of the year. So you can see that in the warmest months, July, August, September, we see the highest amount of warming, and by multiple degrees Celsius, which is pretty phenomenal. After dam removal, those drop right down, and we can still see maybe slight increases in temperature in the most summer months, but largely we do not see the effects that we saw beforehand. And this actually changed the classification of the stream in the impoundment and downstream from a cool water stream back to a cold water stream. And so that, you can imagine, would have an effect on the fishes. So what did we see? There's the buildup. So brook trout are the classic cold water fish that people talk about. And here we're plotting US is upstream and DS is downstream. And so the maroonish color is before dam removal and the blue color is after dam removal. And you can see in both upstream and downstream reaches from where the former dam was, we see increases in brook trout abundances, so catch per unit effort overall. If we look by site, though, it's a slightly different story. So we've got some sites that show really considerably higher abundances post-removal, but we have some sites that actually show lower abundances downstream post-removal. There really is a mixed story here, partially related to the temperatures and the temperature changes in those streams, but these are all streams that I'm showing right here that have brook trout. So it's not like we're showing the warm water streams that didn't really have those temperature effects. But yeah, I think a big part of this is related to what fishes have access here, right? And other aspects of the habitat that brook trout require. And so there's a lot of potential for brook trout improvement, but we don't necessarily see it in all locations within a short time following dam removal. I'm going to show you one more cold water fish species, sculpin. So we actually found the opposite result with slimy sculpin in that after dam removal, both upstream and downstream, we saw lower abundances. Now, we could think that these lower abundances are, happening overall in the system. Maybe these times that we're sampling them, the streams are warmer, warmer years, that sort of thing, or problems with the habitat. But the fact that we do see these reductions downstream too get me thinking about the short-term impacts of dam removal. And sculpin do not move a whole lot. If you know sculpin well, some of them will hunker down in the same little riffle for their whole entire life, which is kind of amazing. And so their more limited movement probably explains the difference in the response that we see in the time frame of this study. I'm just going to show you a couple of other ways to look at the fish results. We calculated the species richness upstream. We saw a tendency to increase species richness after dam removal, but in the downstream reaches, we see a decrease in species richness. We think this is largely explained by kind of spillover species that would be coming from the impoundment. So again, in the impoundment, you have really different taxa because this is not flowing water environments, they're lentic environments. And so if those taxa are kind of spilling over around the dam, literally or just figuratively, they're around it, there's a space for them, then the loss of the dam and the loss of that unique habitat as an impoundment can actually decrease species richness, the number of species there. It can also decrease species diversity, so the variability, the richness and the variability around those numbers in those downstream habitats. So it's really important. I think the message here is to think about what the species are and what might be the goals in terms of changing. A lot of these changes might be changing toward stream fishes that have lower diversity. And so maybe that isn't really the goal here. With dam removal, it's recovering to what those native stream fish assemblages look like. We also plotted here all of the species. So rather than, kind of coming into one index, we plotted all of the species. Each point is a given site and sample. And so the red points are before dam removal and the blue points are after dam removal. So we plot these sort of assemblages, all of the species and their abundances in this ordination space. And what we can look at is what species describe the sites that are in different spots. And so on the left-hand side of this figure, we see more tolerant, cool water species. And on the right-hand side, we see more intolerant cold water species. And the thing that's shifting from pre to post is toward the more intolerant and cold water species. So from an assemblage standpoint, we are shifting to more sensitive species and those cold water species as we would expect with dam removal. And the last thing I want to say about the fishes is, really thinking about them in terms of these dam removals, opening up habitat, providing access. The assemblages, the species that are there, some of them need to move to different locations to survive. For example, warm temperatures. So cold water refugia is a big um, well, the lack of cold water refugia can be a problem. And so having access to those colder areas for fishes that require them, even cool water fishes that require them to sustain through really warm summer temperatures, the lack is a problem. So removing the dams and allowing more access into those habitats can be really valuable to avoid extinction, local extinction of species. So that's the fish story. I'm going to switch gears to the freshwater mussel story. And when you think about freshwater mussels and dam removal, we think about some of the many benefits of dam removal. Certainly, increasing connectivity, just like with fishes, can help for populations to not be distinct upstream and downstream, and to spread gene flow throughout stream networks. Also, the restoration of the habitat, having those fine sediments are really important for freshwater mussels. And then freshwater mussels require host fishes. And so the benefits to the fishes are also going to benefit the mussels. So removing the dams is going to be really, really important for reproduction and dispersal of mussel species. That said, dam removal can also have some negative consequences to freshwater mussels, at least in the short term. So mussels, because they don't and can't move as much as fishes, are prone to dewatering, to be susceptible to the dewatering. So when water is reduced in the impoundment during dam removal, that can expose mussels that can't move fast enough. They move some, but they don't move super fast, right? They can be buried by free release of sediments downstream. Impoundments tend to have a lot of algae, and that's really important food source for mussels. So they're filterers as adults and juveniles. And so changes in food availability can happen with dam removal. And then also, dams provide some sort of hydraulic refuge from large flows. And so we sometimes see big populations of mussels immediately downstream of dams. And removing the dam obviously, it makes it more variable like you would naturally see in a stream system, but we can lose those hydraulic refuges. And so there are concerns about mussels and dam removal. How much is known about those concerns in the literature? Well, my PhD student, Alexa Hirschberger, has been, and a whole group of undergraduate students have been scouring the literature to try to find the effects of dams and dam removal on freshwater mussels. And you can see from their results, so they just finished their literature search. There's a lot of studies and a lot more recently in the last 2 decades, which is really exciting and encouraging. Unfortunately, only a fifth of those studies are on dam removal themselves, so most of them are on dams. Most of them are in North America, but this is a challenge and a problem of where the research is of these studies that we could pull data from. And then in terms of study type, yeah, most of them are scientific articles, but you can see a big chunk are almost a quarter are reports in this gray literature that is often hard to get to and find and understand the effects. So Alexa is taking on the task of doing a meta-analysis to try to understand these effects of dams and dam removal on mussels, and we're really excited about what those results might tell us more comprehensively. In the meantime, she's also working on a local dam removal site along with our collaborator at Mass Wildlife, Jason Carmignani. This is a site that DER is leading the dam removal. And this is on the Ware River, and some of you know this site. It is a phased dam removal. So intentionally, because of the freshwater mussels of concern there, the dam is being removed gradually. So some boards and then wait a while and some more boards and wait a while to dewater it, and then eventually the whole structure. At this point, it's actually all the way down with boards, but the structure is going to be coming out this summer, which is super exciting. And so we were looking at the effects on the mussels in a variety of parts of this system, both in the impoundment and downstream, and doing some translocation, which I'll share with you in a second. So the first project is assessing mussel stranding following dewatering. So this impoundment, it might not look like an impoundment, what you see on the right. It's this long linear impoundment. So it is slowing the water upstream for several kilometers. And so we expected that with this phased removal, that those upper reaches, which are on the far top right corner, are going to get dewatered first, and then the middle reaches, and then farther downstream as the boards were removed, as the water is coming down. And so every time boards were removed, we went out and did mussel stranding surveys. So this entailed, so we went to these 15 locations on both banks of the stream, and a very simple process of walking, if we could walk. I mean, sometimes it was too mucky to walk. We accessed these via canoe, and counting and grabbing any mussel that we found that was still alive and moving them back into the wetted area. And then, of course, we, kept track of the numbers and the species that we found. Again, we're thinking about these three different sections as potentially having different responses to dam removal. And so I'm going to show you the results from the drawdown session. So here's the time frame on the bottom is from August of 2024 to October of 2025. And then in that period of time, all of the drawdowns happened. And immediately following every board release, we were out there surveying. Not such a pretty picture on the left-hand side, I apologize, but we did see stranding. We saw mussels out there that needed to be rescued. This is part of, I want to mention Jacob Sorensen's honors thesis, which he's finishing in May. And so these are early results from here. But we see that the area closest, site 1, which is closest to the dam, did not have a whole lot of stranding, but in the sites that were in the second range and then the farthest upstream range, we saw a whole lot of stranding, which is obviously very concerning. That's the broad scope. When you look at a site-specific scale, we had a lot of evidence of what things affect stranding. And so clearly how fast the water comes down matters. And that's not just a matter of what boards are removed, but the time of year and how high the flows are. So when we removed boards, when it was high flows, we didn't see as much stranding as when the flows were lower and those boards were actually dropping the water level. Mussels can sense the water going down, but they have to move somewhere. And so they either go straight down in the substrate or they could move horizontally and hopefully directionally toward more water, but they don't always do that. So bank slope can be a big factor to affect with the drawdown, how fast they have to move to stay in water. And then the thing that we saw pretty obviously just by doing these stranding surveys is that at these sites that had large cobbles, at the sites that had large wood, right behind the wood, you would find a group of mussels that basically couldn't go any further. And so that is a problem for the mussels trying to self-rescue as the water draws down. So we're looking more into how these factors affect mussel stranding. We're also, as I mentioned, sampling downstream. So we're looking at various distances downstream of the dam. We have 15 sites. And for this part, we are doing density estimates. And so these are quadrats that we excavate completely and get all mussels below the surface and on the surface and various sizes. So that we can estimate density overall in the site. You don't actually excavate the whole area, you excavate a subset, which is what the quadrat figure is showing. And we've done this every summer and we'll continue to do it this summer. The quick results from, and sorry, I should mention that we do have a control site upstream of the impoundment. We expected that there would be more effects immediately downstream of the dam than farther downstream of the dam. And this is what we found. So these are mostly Eastern Elliptio that we are finding. We're recording all species, but this is a common freshwater mussel species. So it wasn't ones that we had to like move out of the way, but we wanted to see how the density has changed with dam removal. And so there are slight decreases in densities from 2024 to 2025. Some of our highest densities were in the upper reaches and kind of in the middle in terms of distance downstream of the dam. Um, but I think we'll learn a lot more this summer after the full dam removal. That's when the sediment's coming down. That's when we would expect that these densities could potentially change. So we're interested to see what that effect is. Um, we also have been looking at downstream effects. Jason has been looking at downstream effects with Mass Wildlife at another site in Massachusetts. And I want to share these because these are, actual results years after the dam removal. So this was removed in 2021. And he had one upstream site and two other control streams upstream, and then various distances downstream. You can see the 25 meters, 100, 200, 300, and 400 meters downstream. And he's got there's two species that are in these sites, the margaritifera, so the eastern pearl shell, and this Elliptio complanata, the eastern Elliptio. And one thing that I want you to notice is that in these immediate downstream of the dams is where we're seeing some of the interesting things happening. The margaritifera are not actually changing that much from before to after dam removal. Again, the dam was removed between the 2021 sampling and the 2022 sampling. But for the Eastern Elliptio, we do see declines in those numbers, especially in that site that was immediately downstream of the dam that had really high numbers prior to dam removal. So certainly there is potential to really reduce those densities with the dam removal. I want to point out that we had a drought year in here, and so we actually think a lot of the losses are related to low flows and drought, not dams specifically, but there's an interplay between the two of them, and I think it's important to recognize. Going back to the Wheelwright Dam, the third thing that we were doing was translocating mussels. So we're moving them, we're marking them, we're putting pit tags on them. We're trying to find them again to see how they are doing, how they are surviving from the translocation. So translocating really far downstream out of where we would expect the impact to be. And so this is really one of the few strategies we have, rescuing mussels and moving mussels when we do have a dam removal in mussels. We also did the same translocation in the Nissitissit River. That was a dam, the Millie Turner Dam that was removed in 2015, both the rescuing that you see in that picture in the center, and then also the translocation, in this case, of mussels upstream. And we sampled the mussels, these are the mussels that we translocated. We sampled the habitat in addition to the mussels. And so what we're really interested in seeing is how that mussel habitat, what do the mussels need, which is in the blue oval, and what is the actual habitat that's available? And is that available habitat shifting to be more like what the mussels like? And this is 2015, so we have an opportunity now to look 10 years later and see what they're doing, and that is our plan this summer. Okay, I'm going to shift to the last part of my talk and putting it all in context. Actually, before I wanted to mention, I have a little sticky note reminding me that Jason and Alexa are actually planning to do some sort of a workshop at the or at the conference in the fall, so the September 18th Dam Busters conference. So this is a little bit of a teaser about what, what's happening with mussels, and they can give a lot more expertise about mussels, how you sample them, what you do, how you might plan and think around mussels and dam removal. Okay, so the last part, putting it in context. So wanted to share with you results of a survey of dam removal practitioners in the Northeast that we conducted several years ago, really asking folks, what are you doing and why are you doing it, and what things influence your decisions? We found that restoration potential was actually the most important piece for dam removal planning. So not to say that funding and dam owner support and all these other things aren't important, but restoration potential was the biggest driver for putting efforts into dam removal, which is extremely promising, that we're kind of thinking about that front and center. And what are we thinking about when we think about restoration potential? Mostly migratory fishes. So we might be thinking about water quality and floodplain connectivity and get down to cold water fishes, but we're not thinking about a lot of different variety of the organisms that inhabit these, and certainly not thinking a whole lot about freshwater mussels, although a few people in the survey did mention freshwater mussels. So I bring this up here to be, reminding us that there's a lot of different ecosystem responses, and that, kind of considering all of these holistically will allow us to really kind of have the conversation about dam removals and the ecological benefits better than just a one story thing. If it's a one species or one piece of the story, then the chance that it could not work is a problem. And also it's ignoring the fact that there's a lot of other pieces of the puzzle. And I think communicating to the public and stakeholders about the variety of responses is really, really important. I showed you some stories with dam removals and measuring a couple years after dam removals. But I didn't bring up the fact of what we might expect following dam removal. A lot of the expectations that we're going to have a recovery are thinking about sort of the long-term effects. What do we ultimately have? But the short-term effects, some of those that I showed you with the freshwater mussels and potentially even with the fishes, with the sculpin, are real. So on a shorter time scale in terms of like the months and a couple of years after dam removal, we might actually expect declines. And that's a hard thing for people to swallow, right? Is like you're trying for this restoration and I don't find whatever I wanted here. But the ultimate goal for that longer term recovery is a much improved ecosystem structure and function. So we really need more studies that are looking at these long-term responses. The big projects that I talked about with the Division of Ecological Restoration, a lot of those dams were removed a decade ago. And so we have an opportunity right now to look at things 10 years later. I can't tell you whether 10 years later means it's a long-term response, but certainly we expect things to be really different in that time frame than a year or two following removal. And so working with the Division of Ecological Restoration to sort of plan out this 10-year later responses. Another perspective that I wanted to give everyone was about thinking about the organisms that we're looking at and how common they are in the landscape and how our decisions potentially are different given that. If it's a very common species, then potential short-term losses of those species is probably fine. If they're common, they probably have sources that they can recolonize later. But if they're not very common, so things like the brook floater that is only found in 4 different watersheds in Massachusetts and is state endangered, if we were to remove a dam immediately upstream of a brook floater population, we might risk losing that population. And losing 1 of 4 is a lot, right? In terms of the recovery and the potential for overall the species in the state. And so I think it's really valuable to think about that sort of context. And we have a lot of dams that we want to remove. And maybe there are reasons why there are certain dams that we might not prioritize to be the first ones, given those sorts of concerns and threats. Another big picture perspective here is where dam removal fits into the story, given climate change and given other threats. And so we have been modeling freshwater mussel and freshwater fish assemblages. I'm just showing the mussel assemblages here in the Northeast, and looking at those, how they change and how they could potentially change with changes in temperatures and flows as we reflect in the climate change scenario over here. This is work from a former postdoc, Jenny Rogers. And so you can see that there are losses in freshwater mussels from the baseline to climate change. So how can we think about dam removal in this context about where we might do dam removals? And what might we expect if we do dam removal? So we looked at dam removal. So the baseline, the purple up top, is the current conditions of mussel richness. And then if you focus on the low elevation, I think it's clearer to see the decline with climate change that's expected in richness. And the question was, if we remove dams, if we remove impervious cover, if we add natural land cover in the riparian zone, if we add forest cover in the watershed, can we recover these populations? And the answer was dam removal alone is not going to do it. We actually need all of these techniques combined, and we're still sometimes not getting back to that point. So we need to be thinking holistically about other strategies, and being realistic, I think, about what the risks are associated with climate change. Obviously, we are continuing to do dam removal, which is so exciting, and at rates that we haven't seen beforehand, which is really exciting. And I think it's a neat opportunity to be thoughtful about where we're removing dams, and where we invest the dollars and time and resources in what we're doing. We're starting a new project with Mass Wildlife and the Nature Conservancy, where we'll be doing some structured decision-making workshops to start to help to make decisions both in the Appalachian Highlands, so the western part of Massachusetts, and then in one watershed, in the Fort River watershed. So two different scales of how you might make decisions given different partners and the resources that they have at the larger scale. How can we do things collectively and collaboratively to have the best ecological responses? And then within a watershed, where might we focus our efforts? And then I have one other project, so I'm just giving you a few of the things that are on the horizon with my research group. So we're working with Norcross Wildlife and Mass Audubon and others to do this restoration on Norcross Wildlife's property of the Winnicott Brook watershed. This is an exciting project with 9 dam removals, many 50 more culvert removals, road removals, really restoring this whole watershed, and with beavers coming in too. So we're really excited about thinking about it as a holistic standpoint in the watershed and what we see in terms of biotic recovery. In this case, we've got fishes and turtles and plants and others that are really we're hoping to see in terms of the response. So I'm going to leave you with this picture, before after picture of the Nissitissit Dam removal. I think, you know, we all know very well the benefits of these dam removals for stream ecosystems, but having these numbers, having the data, and being thoughtful about this, because there's a lot of variability that we see across sites, so that we can do the best restoration possible for the benefit of the ecosystems, is where we're at. So thank you for listening, and I'm really happy to hear any thoughts folks have, any questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. We got a lot of great questions, which is exciting. Karen asked, can you relocate mussels ahead of time?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Karen. So yeah, I didn't actually talk about the timing of when you do those translocations. So all of those translocations, the example I gave you in the Nissitissit and with the Wheelwright Dam, are before dam removal. So we're looking for them and we're moving them. So I showed you examples of in the downstream areas from the dams. Can you also do it in the impounded areas? Yes, they're just harder to find. It's a lot more work to do snorkel and scuba surveys in impoundments. They're often very turbid, and so often we do not find the mussels as easily in the impoundments. A lot of the mussels in the impoundments are not the endangered species that we're worried about right now. So when we were doing the stranding surveys, we were finding the common eastern elliptio mostly, but we occasionally did find some of the species that are listed. So yes, when the water comes down, it's easier to find them, but we certainly could be doing more efforts in snorkeling and scuba in the impoundments beforehand if there's a known large population. In most cases, that's not the case. That it's not the impoundment that is the biggest concern. Thanks for that question.
Jane asked, how can I find out what data, if any, was collected on Electric Dam in Pittsfield before its removal?
Great. Yeah. So I think I'll answer the question generally. If you have a specific dam and dam removal question, figuring out who did the dam removal and asking those folks is really the best way. Teleelectric Dam is actually one of the dams that we studied for the water quality and macroinvertebrates and fishes. So we have great data beforehand, the dam removal and the we have a report that has all of those data in appendices by site. And so you can start with that and then follow up with me, certainly agency work on fishes and others. So sometimes it's best to go to the agencies to find some of these data, but we have a lot of data from our work.
Cool. Brooke asks, are there any community science programs for mussel population studies or ways mussel surveys can be done locally?
Yeah, that's a great question, and part of the reason why I wanted to bring up the fall conference. So, you know, at a basic level, sampling mussels just requires looking and finding them. I mean, they look like rocks, but like if you get used to what they look like and you see the valves and you can find them. So it is actually a really great thing to engage citizen scientists with. We find that snorkeling is more effective than using view buckets at the clear bottom. You just see it a lot better, but we've had community scientists work and help with that too. A lot of our work in a project that I didn't mention here with a former student was with the Connecticut River Conservancy, and we used a lot of volunteers from there, which was fantastic. Um, you do need trained malacologists to identify them. They're not super easy to identify. We also have to be really, really careful about how we handle the mussels. So it's not just a matter of throwing the mussels back. They have to be carefully seeded into the ground so that they reattach and do not float downstream and put back in the habitats where they were found. So, and also not keep them out of the water too long. So there's definitely it's definitely possible to use people with limited expertise and to train people, but this would be alongside other experts, and there's certainly things to think about. And we have some protocols online for how to do some sampling, both in a rapid assessment way and if we were marking animals. And so those are things that you can look at. A lot of times saw somebody in the chat mention that they hired Ethan Nadeau from Biodiversity. So there are consultants that can be used to do the sampling and the surveys. And certainly, when you have more experience, you tend to find more mussels.
Thank you. I think you kind of answered this in your presentation, but Matt asked, have there been pit tag or other mock recapture monitoring efforts done at these sites to better understand whether most populations are declining or moving or just moving spatially?
Yeah. So traditionally, most people just put these little hull print tags that have numbers on them on each valve of the mussel. And so when you find them again, you've found it before, and then you can kind of characterize not just movement, but also survival, growth, that sort of thing. For the Wheelwright project, I think it might be the first project in Massachusetts that has started using pit tags. And so pit tags are pretty commonly used with fishes. With mussels, it's actually even easier. You just glue them to the outside of the shell, and they work actually. And so it's easier to find mussels afterwards with pit tagging than you take a wand and find the mussel. And sometimes those mussels are buried underground. And so just having that detection is really helpful to either find it again or know it's there. So I think pit tags are definitely improving our ability to recapture. It's just one extra step and tool. And they're not used separately from the individual tags. So both are kind of used simultaneously because sometimes those pit tags can fall off.
Cool. Dan asked, have you worked on removing dams in cranberry bogs? If so, do you have innovative ways to remove or modify the dams or add fish ladders?
Yeah, so our group has not worked in cranberry bogs directly, so I'm not the best person to ask about that. We have done many dam removals that are on the coast and some that are head of tide, and we do have to think about things a little bit differently in those landscapes. In terms of fish passage, it obviously wasn't a focus here of this talk. We have worked on some sites that have had changes in fish passage. But the dam removal is a really different story here, right? Fish passage can only and maybe I should have mentioned that in this talk, is that there's really limits to how much will pass with fish. Fish passage is never going to be 100%. You can never make a ladder that 100% of fishes move freely. It's just not possible, like by definition. And so we're always trying to improve passage and make it as efficient as possible, reduce how much energy fishes take to pass, but some aren't even motivated to go across those ladders, and that's a problem too. So fish passage is really not a solution in terms of river restoration. It's a tool that can help make a few things better, and it's really focused on one thing, right? It's fishes, right? And so one of the things that I really try to communicate to folks is that, if we're thinking holistically about river restoration, we should be thinking about all aspects of the ecosystem and the biota, and not just one piece of the puzzle.
Great, thank you. And I kind of add on to that. I know our agency in Massachusetts has done dam and berm removals in cranberry bogs as part of cranberry bog restoration, also recreating the wetland habitat too. So, and I know other nonprofits have been working on that too. So definitely something that can be done,
Yeah,
and has seen positive benefits to the fish passage and stuff. So,
great. And
um,
thanks. I see Nick responded and said he can share some stuff too, Nick Nelson. So thank you.
great. And then Dan also asked, how do you work with abutting landowners who don't support dam removal because of the adjacent pond being removed?
I feel like
You-
this is for a different webinar that you've
Yes.
covered this topic. And maybe Robert, you have a better answer to this question. I'll start and then you can finish.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are a lot of people, I guess from an ecological perspective, I'll take that angle. There are a lot of people that think that they're going to lose all of the things that are in their impoundment. And that is true in some sense. Like it's not going to be the same. A lot of times we have to communicate about what this landscape was naturally. A lot of people, they've seen this is all they're used to, right? It must be like this. But really, what did our landscape look like before dams? And it's very different than the landscape we see right now. So I think showing people that, and giving them that perspective of what would be here is really helpful. Robert, do you
Yeah.
want to say more about it?
Yeah. I can add a little bit on that. I know we're running out of time, but one thing I would say is that there's been examples, and I know down in on the South Shore, North South Rivers, they've talked to neighbors who were opposed, and that they've seen the river restored. They love it. So I think that sometimes you can't change everybody's mind. Also, it's good to communicate to the public and to community members, like who has the ultimate authority on the dam, because if it's a public dam, it's a private dam. With private dam, the donor kind of has the final say um, on making a decision on it. So it's making sure people understand that, have space to talk about it. I think is good. But yeah, definitely check out the other webinars we have. Um, and we have one more question. I know we're running at time. Shannon from Vermont DEC asked, she said, funding for this level of monitoring is challenging. What funding was used to pay for your research? It's a very good
Yeah.
question.
So thank you. And my first slide had a lot of my funding sources. So NIFWIF was one source that started. I have gotten funds from Mass Environmental Trust in the sale of the license plates. Division of Ecological Restoration has supported this. Even other state agencies like Mass Wildlife have supported it in the past. I shared examples of some regional work with Fish and Wildlife Service funding. So sometimes it does take a lot of creativity. I agree completely that this sort of monitoring is kind of an afterthought, but it really doesn't have to take that much. It's a minor cost relative to the cost of the dam removal. And so I would kind of love to get people thinking a little bit more about how to incorporate a little bit of funding when they're getting the funds for the actual removal to learn a little bit of information. It's not that we need to learn everything about every single dam, but I think the more that we can do some easier things and where we know that there's specific concerns, and collecting some data on that can only help with future dam removals. And so if we can couple those with funding that is really about the infrastructure and about the restoration, then we likely will find that there are it's enough funding to do the research and monitoring. Thanks.
Thank you. And we hit all the questions with a minute to spare. So thank you, everybody, for coming. And thank you, Dr. Roy, for the great presentation and everybody for the interesting questions. And like I said, make sure to fill out the survey for a chance to win the water bottle hydro flask from Mass Rivers. And with that, have a great rest of your Wednesday.